In 2023, Dr. Elizabeth Barnes, a professor at Columbia University in the American Studies Department, got an unexpected package. It came from an elderly woman in Rochester, New York, who had inherited a box of old family photos. She wanted to know if they had any historical value before donating them to a local museum. Most of the pictures were typical family portraits from the early 1900s, but one photo immediately stood out to Dr. Barnes. It was dated April 12, 1906, and showed a woman in her 30s sitting beside a young boy who looked to be about 8. A stamp on the photo showed it was taken at Morrison's Photography Studio in Rochester, a high-end place known for working with wealthy families. At first, the picture looked like a standard formal portrait of the time. The woman wore a dark, high-collar dress with fine beadwork, and her hair was done in a popular style from that era. The boy, likely her son, stood beside her in a sailor outfit, with his hand resting on her shoulder. The setting featured a decorative backdrop, an ornate chair, and lighting designed to highlight their social status. Everything about the photo seemed normal, except the woman's face. Dr. Barnes had spent over 15 years studying historical portraits and was used to seeing neutral or serious expressions, especially since people had to stay still for long exposure times. But this woman's face didn't fit that pattern. Her eyes seemed intense, filled with a mix of determination, fear, and emotional strain. Her body was posed correctly, but her expression told a very different story. What made it even stranger was how unaffected the boy looked. He appeared happy, unaware of anything unusual. Dr. Barnes took a closer look and noticed more odd details. The image was incredibly clear for 1906, suggesting the studio used high-quality equipment. But the woman's hands were tense, her fingers clenched tightly in her lap, with knuckles showing to the fabric of her dress. For someone under that kind of emotional pressure, it seemed unlikely she could sit perfectly still for a portrait. To learn more, Dr. Barnes reached out to experts. Professor Michael Chun, a photography specialist at the Rochester Institute of Technology, confirmed the photo was professionally done. The lighting and composition were excellent, but he noticed something unusual too. There was a slight blur around the woman's eyes, possibly from holding back tears or subtle facial movements. She also consulted Dr. Sarah Whitfield, a psychologist who analyzes historical documents for signs of mental health issues. Dr. Whitfield saw signs of high stress or fear in the woman's expression. Her wide eyes and tight mouth suggested she was trying hard to control her emotions while keeping a formal pose. According to Dr. Whitfield, this showed either incredible self-control or a strong reason to finish the photo session despite her emotional state. What made the situation more mysterious was the contrast between the woman's distress and the boy's calm appearance. Kids are usually sensitive to how their parents feel, but this boy showed no concern, which raised more questions. Dr. Barnes wanted to find out who the woman and boy were. The back of the photo only had the studio stamp and the date, no names. But their clothing and the quality of the photo suggested they were part of Rochester's upper class. Morrison Studio had a reputation for serving rich and influential families between 1895 and 1920. Dr. Barnes contacted the Rochester Historical Society to look through their records. While many documents from the studio had been lost over time, some appointment books remained. These records showed that clients usually paid high prices and booked sessions in advance. One record stood out. On April 12, 1906, there was only one appointment. Mrs. H. Caldwell and Son, 2 p.m., special circumstances, payment in advance. The note about special circumstances was unusual, as most entries were basic. Looking into Rochester's well-known families, Dr. Barnes found that the Caldwells were wealthy and socially active. Henry Caldwell ran a successful business making farming equipment, and the family lived in a prestigious neighborhood. Newspapers from the early 1900s frequently mentioned Helena Caldwell, likely the woman in the photo, attending charity events and social gatherings. But in early 1906, there was a sudden gap. She disappeared from the society pages for several months. In both 1905 and later that same year, she was often mentioned, but during the time around the photo session, she was nowhere to be found in the news. Census records confirmed that Helena had a son named William, whose age matched the boy in the photo. But by 1910, something strange showed up. William was living with his grandparents instead of his parents. No explanation was given. All signs pointed to something serious happening in early 1906. The photo, Helena's expression, and William's living situation all hinted at a family crisis. When Dr. Barnes tried to dig deeper by looking at official records from that year, she ran into missing information. Rochester's archives usually had well-preserved documents from that time, but records linked to the Caldwell family during this critical period were either gone or heavily edited. Some court files were even sealed, a rare move usually only used in serious criminal or national security cases. According to legal experts, for records to still be sealed after more than 100 years meant there was something highly unusual going on. This level of secrecy suggested either long-lasting legal concerns or outside influence. Even hospital records were odd. Helena's name showed up before and after 1906, but there was no trace of her during the first few months of that year. That's not what you'd expect from a wealthy woman, who likely had regular medical care. One more odd clue came from the society pages. Several prominent families from Rochester were noted to have left town for extended trips in early 1906. Some traveled to Europe or sent their children abroad for school. The timing of several wealthy families leaving Rochester in early 1906 closely lined up with the date of Helena Caldwell's photo session and her sudden disappearance from social records. Around the same time, financial records were available showed unusual movement in the Caldwell family's bank accounts. There were large withdrawals and transfers that hinted at either major investments or the need to cover unexpected costs, possibly related to travel, legal matters, or both. Taken together, the financial activity, missing documents, and a string of prominent families quietly leaving town, it started to look like something big had happened among Rochester's upper class. Helena Caldwell's intense, fearful look in that 1906 portrait wasn't just personal. It likely tied into a larger event that the city's elite were trying to keep quiet. Dr. Barnes began reviewing Rochester newspapers from early 1906, hoping to find clues in how local events were being reported at the time. The archives of the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle showed a strange shift. Normally, the paper gave plenty of attention to local social news, business happenings, and personal milestones. But for the first few months of 1906, that kind of reporting dropped off sharply. Instead, the front pages were filled with national stories, like coverage of the San Francisco earthquake and political news from Washington. More telling was what wasn't being covered. The usual society columns were thin. Events that would typically be written up, fundraisers, parties, family trips, were barely mentioned. Several regular columnists seemed to take time off during this exact period. In the back pages, Dr. Barnes found short, vague notices: local businessmen traveling for work, families leaving town for health reasons, and social events being postponed for unforeseen circumstances. On their own, these seemed ordinary, but altogether, they hinted at something being quietly covered up. Then she came across an editorial printed on April 15, 1906, just 3 days after Helena's photo was taken. It was titled Maintaining Community Standards. The editorial talked about the importance of privacy and being respectful when families go through difficult times. While it didn't name anyone or mention a specific event, the timing and the tone suggested it was aimed at something recent and sensitive involving Rochester's upper crust. The piece called on journalists to think about the impact of their reporting and praised those who chose privacy in hard times. What made it even more interesting was that the paper's editor at the time, Robert Morrison, was the brother of the photographer who took Helena's portrait. That family connection between the local media and the photography studio raised questions about whether efforts were being made behind the scenes to control the flow of information. Digging deeper, Dr. Barnes found letters in Robert Morrison's personal papers, now held by the Rochester Historical Society. In early 1906, Morrison had exchanged messages with influential business leaders. The letters talk about protecting the community and keeping a low profile during what Morrison called a period of recent unpleasantness. Everything pointed toward a coordinated effort to prevent details of whatever happened from reaching the public. The real breakthrough came when Dr. Barnes got access to private medical files that had recently been donated by the family of Dr. Edmund Thornfield, a respected physician who treated many wealthy families in Rochester at the time. His patient notes from January through April 1906 showed a clear shift from routine visits to urgent cases involving anxiety, emotional breakdowns, and what he called nervous exhaustion. One entry stood out. On April 10, 1906, just 2 days before Helena's portrait, Dr. Thornfield wrote that Mrs. H. Caldwell had come to him in a deeply distressed state. She was having nightmares, trouble sleeping, and overwhelming feelings of fear. Physically, she seemed fine, but he believed she had been through something traumatic. He gave her medication to help her sleep and strongly advised her to leave town for her own well-being. Despite this, Helena went ahead with her portrait session. Another note from April 12 confirmed this. Dr. Thornfield wrote that she insisted on keeping the appointment even though he warned against it. She told him she had to appear calm and keep her son from finding out what was really going on. He expressed concern about her emotional state and judgment. After the photo was taken, Helena came back in even worse shape. Dr. Thornfield wrote that she had suffered a complete emotional collapse and was afraid the camera had captured her distress. He again urged her to leave Rochester immediately and stay with relatives. Dr. Thornfield also treated young William Caldwell. His notes revealed the boy had recurring stomach problems, but no sign that he knew anything was wrong. Helena, it seemed, had gone to great lengths to protect him. The doctor advised keeping William's daily routine unchanged to give him a sense of normalcy. All of this suggested a group of upper-class women who had gone through something deeply disturbing. Helena was among the most affected. Her choice to go through with the photo session, despite everything, explained the strange gap between her perfectly posed body and the clear fear in her face. Then Dr. Barnes uncovered a possible reason behind it all, a long-forgotten industrial accident. While reviewing records of other patients Dr. Thornfield had treated, she noticed a pattern. Many of the women suffering from nervous breakdowns were married to men in the local manufacturing industry. A search through workplace safety reports led her to the Caldwell Agricultural Equipment Company, owned by Helena's husband, Henry. On March 15, 1906, a major accident had occurred at the Caldwell factory. According to the official state report, a mechanical failure had injured some workers during a shift change. The language was clinical and vague, but union records and workers' compensation files told a very different story. Surviving workers described a horrific scene. A large stamping press had failed while many workers were still underneath it. One survivor said the screams went on for what seemed like hours. Others recalled men being crushed and trapped. The union's version listed 12 dead and many more badly hurt, far above the state's official count of 3 deaths. It looked like the company had tried to minimize the tragedy, possibly to avoid lawsuits or bad press. Dr. Barnes then found something even more shocking. Internal company files showed that, on the day of the accident, Henry Caldwell had arranged a factory tour for investors and their families. It was time to show off the company's newest equipment. Helena Caldwell and other wives of investors had been at the factory when the press failed. For weeks after witnessing a deadly factory accident at her husband's company, Helena Caldwell sat for a formal portrait. Behind her composed pose was visible trauma. She had seen workers crushed in a machinery failure that killed at least 12. The company, Caldwell Agricultural Equipment, launched a cover-up, paying victims' families and pressuring officials and the media into silence. Dr. Elizabeth Barnes later uncovered the truth through hospital logs, legal documents, and personal letters. Records showed Helena and other witnesses were treated for emotional shock, while wealthy families fled to Europe, fearing exposure. Helena resisted the portrait, writing to her sister about the unbearable guilt. Her husband insisted it proceed to protect their reputation. The photo became a haunting document of buried grief. Dr. Barnes's research brought long-hidden facts to light, prompting historical recognition, a public memorial, and a reevaluation of how early industrial tragedies and their emotional toll were suppressed by those with power.